7:30. Let's keep it in the KUAM News Zoom room. We're going to bring on Adelou Press Secretary Krystal Paco-San Agustin, and from the Physicians Advisory Group, Dr. Felix Cabrera. Good morning, Krystal. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning, KUAM.
Let's just get right into it. So we're here to talk about the CAR score, and I know Dr. Cabrera has a presentation. We're going to do a little share screen, right, Jay? Okay, so we'll go ahead and give you the floor for this presentation on the COVID area risk score with Krystal Paco-San Agustin and Dr. Cabrera from the Physicians Advisory Group.
Sure. Great, thanks, Chris. So basically, it's this. Apologies to the radio listeners who can't see the screen right now, but I'll just talk through what we're showing here. So this first slide basically just showing an example of what we see on JIC reports, the Joint Information Center reports that we get on a nightly basis that Krystal so kindly puts out, at all hours of the evening. But it's quite sporadic, as you can see. Positives, last night we had 101 positives out of 690 tests that were performed. And then you look at the trends, how do you trend what, these numbers when you just look at the positives, 53, 9, 3, 119, 91, 101, 73, 36, 120, 240, 181, 101. So that's and then when the test number of them being anywhere from just 101 up to 1,364 in one day. So this can be quite tough for anyone to kind of track where are we, with our fight with COVID, because this is a long war with multiple battles here. And so we need to give the public a better opportunity to track how things are going. Obviously, things are not good right now with the increased positives that we have from these clusters. But overall, how can we better track? So the idea is to have one score to follow, basically. And we have all these numbers and all these stats that we talk about. But when you relate this to, let's say, basketball, right? So yeah, you can follow the assists, the rebounds, the blocks, the steals from individual players even, or as a team. But ultimately, it's what's on the scoreboard that really matters. And that really helps us track where things are at, and whether or not we're losing the game, or if we're winning the game, or if we're rallying, and or if we're falling back. So those are the things that we want to think about. And then Krystal also had a really good analogy of also thinking of a score like your credit score. There's a lot of math behind it. You can kind of understand a little bit about what those factors are, but in the end, it's the score that really matters, and it's easier to follow. So that's where the COVID area risk score comes into play, or in other words, CAR score. So some of you may remember that the CAR score was used in the summer, primarily for how we risk stratified travelers that were entering to Guam into what quarantine protocol they were going to end up going into. And the CAR score was meant for non-Guam areas, and what their score was, so that we can assess the risk of these different areas. So now we're actually using it to assess ourselves. We always kind of track where we are relative to the rest of the public, but this now is really focused, and in all honesty, this is the third version of the CAR score. But ultimately, it just takes into account the incidence of new cases that we're seeing, and how well our testing identifies these cases, and then also the rate of spread. And you take those three into account, and then you get a good sense of where we are in this battle. Okay, so this is basically where we're at right now. I'm showing here a slide of the recent metrics here. Our CAR score today is 37.5 as of the data that was available last night. And so here I'm going to zoom in on this left graph here that's just specifically the CAR score. And if you look from the beginning of P41, on our first wave, we peaked up at 26.8 CAR score. Then we came down pretty quickly, and we hovered around 5. And so 5 was where we were hovering. We never stayed below 5 consistently. And then the second wave happened, and then we peaked at 24.7. And then we quickly came down, and then obviously we spiked back up to 37.5 today. And then, sorry, I'm gonna take a break here because Felix Cabrera III is being a little wiggly. Yeah. And so I'm gonna pass him off to Mommy. Thank you. That's Felix Potu III, by the way. So my, Cabrera is a common name in Saipan, so we, family clan names. So I'm actually Camillian Potu. So believe it or not, so Potu's on me today, and so literally. But anyway, going back into this, and so you can kind of see where we've been in the recent months and how this relates. But when you compare that to our for example, our on the bottom here, our daily new cases, the bottom left, you can see that the waveform, matches in a similar fashion, right? And then if you look on the top right, the test positivity rate, the waveform matches in a similar fashion. But right now our test positivity rate is 17.8 and our new cases per day total is 121.7. These are 7-day rolling averages. And then this new value here, it's the effective retransmission value. And I'll just talk about this real briefly that, some of you may know the term R naught. And R naught, if you watched Contagion or if you've learned about what was, in terms of how infectious a disease might be, especially at the beginning of a pandemic, that's what the R naught is, R0. This here is when you follow it over time, the real time, so of the retransmission value of a pathogen here. And so the key thing here, bottom line is we want this to be below 1.0. When you say 1.0, what does that mean? So for every time a COVID patient, when somebody's identified as having COVID, and they on average will pass it off to one person, that's 1.0. If it's 2.5, that means they pass it on average off to 2.5 persons, and that's where the exponential spread goes from there. But if you have it below 1.0, that means the pandemic is slowing down. And that means that each person is passing it off to less people. And so we want it to be below 1.0 and stay below 1.0. But right now, unfortunately, it's 1.2 is what it is. So all these other numbers, in the end, they collide and we can follow them just simply as what the CAR score is, and it's 37.5. Now, let me briefly walk through the history here. Busy slide, but it's just mainly the visual of where the graph is going here. So this is the whole pandemic that we've had since the beginning of March here, and some indicators of when mitigation efforts were put in place. But basically, if you follow the brown line here, we started, well above 5, but we could only calculate by end of March. But then once things started to get control, we were easily below 2.5. Throughout the summer, even when we had some bumps, and then the hospitalizations in purple stayed also relatively low, which was, which we could definitely handle. But once the CAR score started rising up, so did the hospitalizations in a delayed fashion, and we rose up again to above 25 on that first wave, but we got it down. The problem is that we got it down and we got it near 5, but it was not consistently below 5, which is this yellow line here. And so we're up and down, up and down. So the hospitalizations did follow in the sense that it did come down very nicely with that, but we needed to sustain at, have it below 5 to really suppress the virus. So that's where the 5 comes from. And so that's why we're starting out with a goal of getting below 5.0. Ultimately, yes, we want to get below 2.5 because we know that that's when we're truly suppressed. But first things first, let's get below 5. Let's do that. And so that we can, at least if we stay below 2.5, even better, right? But I think if we can prove to the governor that we can stay below 5.0 for, through the Thanksgiving weekend and probably for at least 2 weeks, then and do that in a responsible way, then we're proving to her that we're responsible and that we don't have to lock down further, and that we're taking individual responsibility to get the CAR score below 5.0. And we do that, and then she'd be more inclined to lift some of maybe the social gathering restrictions. And so that, it's a give and take here, right? And so, but we don't just get anything for free. We need to prove that we can do this and we can do it together. So, one way of looking at this, so this is the fortnight CAR scores. So those are not Fortnite the game, but Fortnite as in 2 weeks. And so if you look at the trend of where we were, before this this cluster outbreak with the construction and DOC, you can see that we were down to 9.2 in this case, and that was just from a little bit over a week ago, and then we quickly shot up here. But I'm going to go back to this graph here and just look at this first wave when we were at like 27.5 CAR score. We got it down to 5 in 13 days. And that's when that was with the stay-at-home order. And so in 13 days, we went from 27.5 down to 5. And so that's important to know that we can do this in a fairly rapid fashion. And just like the United States Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, said to us that we really can do this, and if we just commit for a minimum of 2 weeks, that we really can get this suppressed, even in the setting of this cluster. And again, it's not a pure cluster, and it's not like we can't say with 100% that it's purely contained, as in that it doesn't affect the rest of the community is what I mean. But if it truly is in well contained, then that number, the CAR score, should drop very fast. So the last thing I'll just mention here is that, again, Guam's current COVID suppression goals: get our CAR score below 5.0 and keep it below 5.0 through Thanksgiving weekend, and a minimum of 2 weeks. Okay, that's our first goal. And then ultimately, yes, we want to keep it below 2.5, because that's when we know that there's less than 2.5, there would be barely any COVID patients in the hospital. And we really want to preserve, obviously, our hospital beds, and obviously reduce the morbidity and mortality in our community. In other words, the illness and deaths related to COVID. And we really can see that once we're at this level here. So goals, we got goals, and we can do it. All right, I'll stop sharing screen and we can discuss further. Take any questions?
I guess the first question I had was on the 1.2 number. Which one was that again?
Mm-hmm.
Is that pretty much contingent on how quickly public health can contact trace how many people each COVID positive person is spreading the virus to? And then how do we compensate for the lag? Because we keep hearing about a lag in the contact tracing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing to be clear is that our struggles were not unique in that aspect, in terms of lag in contact tracing and isolation and quarantine, and that the whole country is having a significant issue. In fact, we're probably doing it better than a lot of areas in the country, because it doesn't exist in some states. That's just the truth, and because it's so rampant. But nonetheless, yes, the better we do that, the better we get this under control, and that's part of it. But the effective retransmission value, or RT is the abbreviation that's used for it. It really is just looking at how many positives have we had over a 14-day span, and what's that trend. And that's how it's calculating the rate of spread by a simple formula that was developed by a professor in Japan, who simplified this. That's why it's called an effective RT, not just the regular. The math of that is even more complex, believe it or not.
Is the CAR score now one of the triggers in the whole P-core system to move from one P-core to another?
We're gonna have to have that discussion in more so with the physician advisory group, the state surgeon cell, and of course the governor, and all parties involved. But it looks like that's what the case is, and if we keep it below 2.5, if you look at what we and note that the triggers that we have for the mitigation and everything that was overlaid with the CAR score graph, that's looking back retrospectively. And we were comfortable to go into P-Core 2, from back on May 10, and that's when the CAR score was like almost 0 at that time. And then we further went to P-Core 3 when the CAR score was around 0. And then we jumped to P-Core 2 once the CAR scores went above 2.5 and went up really rapidly from there. And then the stay-at-home orders, once it shot up within a matter of days to above 10. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that it be tied in with a new iteration of the P-Core triggers. And again, it's going to be more complicated than that in the back end and how we evaluate it. But I think it's still something that the public can use as a reliable way to understand where we would be in the P-Core system. And again, it's not just it is the number by itself, but it's just the rate of change for the number, right?
Yeah, I think that's why it's a little confusing, to me at least, that we're talking about, we can, if we strive for 5, we can ease up on some of the restrictions, but what does that mean for the P-Core? So does that mean that we would go into P-Core 2? Because this whole CAR score takes into account incidence of new cases, how well our testing identifies these cases, rate of spread. But the P Corps, under P Corps 1, it's maximum restrictions, but yet it's looks like P Corps fun out here.
Yeah. Well,
So we do. Go ahead, Doc.
no,
we do.
please.
There's actually somebody bush cutting right outside my door, so hopefully there's not too much of that. So the Chalan-Patahinamla plan, that was early on in our response, and we do recognize that there are some shortcomings with that plan. Because it was meant to go one way and not necessarily back the other way. So that initial P Corps plan was mostly the goal towards recovery, but once you got back into response, it became very difficult to meet those benchmarks, those triggers you talked about. And so we're going to go back and reevaluate that. The Strive for 5 campaign really just simplifies it. It simplifies it to tell you what is our COVID response, or what is our health, what is our COVID health. So like what Dr. Cabrera was saying, I liken this CAR score, this COVID area risk score, to your credit score. It tells lenders your credit health in a singular number. It takes into account a number of variables like your number of accounts, the age of your accounts, your ability to pay your bills on time. And so just like that, or like your GPA as a student, your performance as a student is not singularly graded on just one class, but your overall performance as a student. And so the lower the CAR score, the more incentives, just like the higher your credit rating, the more incentives, rewards, lower interest rates that you can reap. And so that's the general consensus. And we're also, we're following up on that messaging that the Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, provided last week, that we really can control the virus with what we know about COVID. We've all had to evolve our response. And so we're going to have to go back and reevaluate the Chalan-Patahinamla plan. But, the Strive for 5 really just waters it down to a singular number, like Dr. Cabrera said. The Joint Information Center, my team and I, we release this daily number, a nightly number, if you will, but we don't provide you the context. Is this good? Is this bad? Especially like the 3 positives last Monday, people started celebrating. And if you weren't looking at the bigger table, you wouldn't have realized it was 3 positives out of 101 tests. And so maybe that's not so good. And that's what Dr. Cabrera touched on. And so we want to give this one singular number. The governor, again, is very inclined to lift restrictions. There's reason to believe that she'll, the more the community rallies together in this invisible war with COVID, that makes all of us, each and every one of us, soldiers in this battle. And while we know that the armor is wearing your mask, watching your distance, and washing your hands, what metric are we successful? Are we winning? And so five is the number, it's the target, but the real goal, like Dr. Cabrera said, is 2.5, to go back to where we were over the summer. Again, the Surgeon General, he said that Guam was the model. We were winning the war most of summer, and then we let our guard down. So let's go back to winning. This is 5. We consider ourselves at a winning stage. We're winning the game, hopefully. So we want to keep there. It's not enough to just achieve 5, but maintain it. And I think that's another thing that we have to really stress to the public. And so the Joint Information Center, we are committing to putting that CAR score, making it very visible with our nightly reports, so that the public can gauge, okay, this is a good CAR score, this is a bad CAR score, just like your credit score. You know that if you're 700 and above, creditors really look at you and they want to give you loans. And so that's the same thing. Incentivize this, because the holidays are coming up. We all want to enjoy some semblance of the holidays. I was reading on social media, a lot of people are buying in to the Strive for 5 campaign for selfish reasons. And I'm glad. They want to have their birthday is coming up, Christmas is coming up, New Year's is coming up. We don't want a repeat of this all through 2021. Even with the promise of a vaccine, we want to make sure that the people of Guam can manage the virus. And Dr. Adams, the Surgeon General, he reminded us last week that a lot of our main tourist markets, they're performing well because they stuck to the public health guidelines. And so this is our call to the public that, hey, let's keep sticking to the guidelines. Let's achieve this 5, maintain it, even get underneath it at 2.5, and we can enjoy the same kind of the same things we enjoyed over the summer.
What? Let me just play devil's advocate here. And what would you say to those people who say it was what we were enjoying in the summer that led to this crazy surge that we're in now?
Sorry, I'm trying to
Sorry.
hear you.
Sorry, say that again, Chris.
There are those who would argue that all the fun that we had in the summer is why we're in the middle of this crazy surge now.
Well, I would say to that is that, all the fun, this was several months where we kept the car score below 2.5. We're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 months where we kept it below 2.5. And that's, of course, with the strict quarantines that we had early on. And it's easier to keep it low once it's low. It's harder to get it down once it's high, and it takes more effort. But the one thing I want to point out here also is that, again, it's the sustained ability to have it below 5, at least initially, because what we're really trying to do, again, is get the hospital census down and decrease the number of deaths. And there's a lag in that, and you won't see that for probably 10 to 14 days or so after the CAR score goes below 5. And so that's the whole point of why the time span matters, matters a lot. And so we're not, yes, the PCOR system matters, but it gets more complicated when you start thinking about that because of what's tied into the PCOR. We are making this simple. We are trying to save lives. We're trying to keep people from getting too sick. We're trying to reduce the hospitalization census. It's coming back up again. It dropped down. We peaked at 102. We went down into the mid 70s. Now we're back over 82 as of today for the entire island. And so it's slowly creeping back up. And this is very, very serious consequences for us not getting the CAR score down. And so let's keep it that simple in that we get it down so we can save lives. We can get it under 5.0. It's going to make a big, big difference for the hospitals.
Doc, so I was just thinking about what you had said, and we had more stringent and strict measures in place when the CAR score was low. So other than this awareness and marketing campaign, are we anticipating any more measures to further restrict movement, gatherings, openings of businesses? And then that being said, if we're not, how do we expect to get these numbers down if we're not going to be doing the same thing we did when they were down?
Well, okay. So let me do make sure I take a moment to also recognize that the recent drop that we've had in the CAR score. So that was when we were as high as 24.7, and that was toward the last week of October. And then by the beginning of the month, we had dropped down into about 8 or so. A CAR score of about 8. And so the reasons that we think that was very that happened were there's actually 5 different reasons why we think that happened, but one of them is actually is really the emphasis on personal responsibility and not letting your guard down, keeping it up 100%, and that we were very specific. Don't eat with somebody who you don't live with. That means because you're going to take your mask off and you're going to talk. And try and reduce inter-household contact, because we were identifying that as a major cause of spread. And then also, don't go to work if you're feeling sick. And so when people follow those instructions, that was a big part of, we believe, of it dropping down. And then it was also the efforts of the rapid engagement team, which happened around mid-October. And that really made a difference also in identifying these specific parts. So by doing this, we don't have to lock down further. We don't have to restrict. Maybe there's other restrictions if they're, with specific clusters and things like that are very temporary restrictions. But for the public as a whole, we've proven that we can get it down without further, restrictions. It just takes the commitment and, and the rally, that we all can, get behind. And then you see it come down. So really, it's never my initial recommendation for automatic, shutdown, because if we can find a way to do it without further restrictions, then we should. And we've proven that already very recently that we can do that.
How soon are we going to see this revised recovery HNEMLO plan?
So we've had we actually had a draft of it that was reviewed gosh, I want to say about a month ago or so. But you know, there's a lot of key parts there. And if you recall in the very first version of it, a big part of that was that adequate contact tracing and you know, ability. And that was one of the four gated criteria that was there. And we have to give, public health is extremely saturated. We need to give them a reprieve. We need to give them a chance to catch up. And by doing what we can, then they'll be able to do that. So it's not just pouring in more resources for them. We got to help them out. And we really do, and stop blaming them when you know that they're, you know, that they're not following through. I mean, you know, what I mean by that is that yes, they have responsibilities and they should be held accountable, but don't put it all on them 100%, because we all have our individual responsibilities as well. So it goes, you know, it's not 100% them. We have a role in this.
So we could probably see that particular trigger being removed.
Well, I don't want to say removed. I want to say actually
Modified.
check marked. Yeah, and be a modified version of it. And we're getting you know, metrics about how their performance in terms of key performance indicators for the contact tracing and isolation and quarantine. And by, you know, by actually defining that, because it was more of a generic description of what it means, adequate contact tracing, back on the first part of Jalan Para Hinemlu. And so, you know, this time around, it actually has specific metrics that we hope that they can meet, and that can help us with the gated criteria.
And I want to remind you that the rise in the CARS score as of late was because of the clusters. And I think Dr. Cabrera touched on it, is that, you know, the clusters, as long as we can keep them clustered, we can gradually see the CARS score go down. And again, we're mirroring the messaging that the Surgeon General, you know, encouraged the people of Guam. We can do this. We're a very resilient community. I know it seems high now, but again, most of that increase in the CARS score is attributed to the clusters. So once we've finished testing with all the clusters, we most definitely can achieve a lower CARS score and more incentives if we continue to maintain that CARS score. Mm-hmm. So again, the credit score analogy, that's just an analogy to help you understand that there are many variables that are being considered, not just a singular number, not just the nightly results, that, hey, we have 101 cases, that's less than 101 new cases, that's less than the night before, which was 161. We're doing better. It gives you the bigger picture, a singular number to give you a better picture about how we're doing. And so that's really, again, what the CARS score is. I'm just reading the comments.
Did the Surgeon General say, hey, you guys should do this CARS score? That the messaging needed to be easier for people to understand? I'm just wondering where the CARS score, you know, where'd the idea come from? Like, we should change this up and start doing this.
Again, it just sets a goal. We all know, you know, the factors in goal setting. If you don't write down your goal, if you don't take those steps to achieve a goal, then it just becomes a dream. It's still a dream until you write it down, until you take those steps, those action steps.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think Tan Maria and Tun Wan are writing down their goals. I mean, they want something simple and easy to understand.
Yeah.
And that's the CARS score.
I think P-Core was easier to understand. I mean, we're just, you know, asking the questions, but yeah, it seems confusing. But let me just ask you this, because you said if we take out the clusters. So if we took out the clusters, would our CARS score be like 2.5 or something?
So I actually have that. So if you took out as of yesterday, our CARS score was, I think, 33 something and change. But if you remove specifically the Black construction cluster cases that were known at the time of yesterday, our CARS score would actually be down to 8.9. So automatically you have a reference. You know the big difference now. And again, 8.9 is very close to 5.
But that's running under the assumption that there's some invisible bubble that's keeping this cluster within this cluster.
Why we're not,
which is a crazy assumption to me, because the virus is so, easily spread.
Yeah, which is why we're not necessarily advertising what it would be, because we can't say 100% that it's truly in a bubble.
Right.
We're not gonna, that's a dangerous assumption to make overall. Yeah. But the key thing is that, as Krystal said earlier, what we found was that there's tremendous danger also when people think that we're doing better when we're not. When they see because it's a Sunday that we get 3 that there's a report of only 3 positives, but that was only the limited test done by public health for that one day. And that can be, that itself, that information could be dangerous, and that people let their guard down even further because they're only looking at that one day. The CAR score automatically builds into it a minimum of a 1 week look of how we're doing, and in fact, it actually takes up to in the back end of it actually looks at more about 21 days of that. So it's a number that's more reliable to get a sense. If you just tell you that on this one day what the CAR score is, then you kind of get a sense for where we've been over the past week at least.
Since you guys were talking about these clusters, is there anything you're looking at in the future to possibly change to where you remove the clusters from the formula to determine the CAR score?
I wouldn't, again, because the danger behind it, this was more for our operational use only, just to kind of look, just to get a sense of what that difference might be. But again, it's a dangerous assumption to think that a cluster is in a bubble. When a cluster is just really that you identify a spot where there's 3 to 5 positives that were all clearly connected, and then you call that a cluster. But you just knowing on the side that it's better to find clusters than to say this number is very high and it's rampant community spread. That is a very, very, very different scenario. So just knowing on the side that we're at, our CAR score is at 35 now, 37.5, and with that, that it builds into that a couple of different clusters that we can breathe a little bit easier, I should say, but it's still pretty concerning, and we want to follow it very closely. But also it makes us understand that, there's a good chance if these clusters truly are contained well, that CAR score is going to drop really fast.
Right. So the goal, strive for 5, right? That's looking forward. What about if we continue to go backwards, like dive to 55 or whatever it is? What is the threshold of how low we go, or how high we go, that we're going to say, you know what, this is not working. We need to lock down. Have you guys looked at that part of it?
I would pretty much repeat what I had just recently said, that if the CAR score keeps going up high and it's not because of clusters, then we have to think about more strict mitigation factors, because then we're in a completely different level. We're not talking about a CAR score of 24 or 25 anymore. Like you said, yeah, it could theoretically go up to above 50.
Well, 30, almost
scenario.
at 40 right now, today.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, is there a number you guys are looking at? If we're striving for 5, so what is the high number that we should, that would be the trigger that we need to lock down?
Yeah, we have evidence to retrospectively looking about why 5.0 makes sense. We're kind of currently in unprecedented times right now of having this high of a CAR score number in the setting of a big identified cluster. So we can't put hard, cutoffs here in terms of what's going to determine what we recommend to the governor and what the governor ultimately decides. That there's, tremendous amount of factors. That's on the back end, of the discussions here. And so, there's no straightforward answer to that. Just knowing that we're in the situation that there could be, major change. If it calls for it, if it calls for more strict mitigation efforts, then the governor will have to consider that, because again, it's not like the same conversation as we had when we were starting to release the information about following the CAR score, because then that will actually, because that was a conversation before these cluster cases started popping up.
Got that? You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Anything in closing, Krystal? Are we looking at any inclinations from the governor to do anything significant this weekend with restrictions or?
For the community as a whole, I don't suspect any changes. I'm not forecasting any major changes. Again, we just want to set a goal, put a number out there so that when people go on, look at the nightly JICs, or they look at your news reports, they know we're doing well, we're not doing well. Again, she looks at the data nightly or daily every morning, because Dr. Cabrera will summarize basically what that CAR score is every morning when we meet, whether or not more restrictions are warranted. We never want to go back, but we will if we have to. Again, she's very mindful of the data. She's very data driven. Right now, our biggest challenges of the week remain these clusters. The clusters, Black construction now at DOC, but the goal now is to keep those clusters in clusters and ensure that the rest of the community is also doing their part, so that once we get the clusters handled, that we continue to see the downward trend, because we were on a downward trend prior to this week's numbers with the DOC and the Black construction. So again, strive for 5. Basic one number you can look forward to. That 5 is the goal. 2.5 is ideal. And we're going to continue to work towards that throughout the holidays. Again, this is incentive. There's a reward at the end. You do better, you maintain that number. We can see more lifts on restrictions. Every week, you guys ask me, are we going to see more restrictions? Are we going to see a lift in restrictions? And so this really puts all the numbers into context, the singular number we can all strive for, that we know that we're doing well. If we're doing well, there are rewards at the end.
All right, everybody likes rewards, guys. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Krystal.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
See you, Doc. Be safe. First time I seen you in a T-shirt. I just had to say. I know your family wrote the book on Potu, but there's virtual Potu and butter in the Zoom room if you want to take, Doc. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you.
That's okay, Joss. I don't know what to say anymore. Do I still say wash your hands, or am I to say car score? Okay, we got to take a break. We got to sign off from KUAM TV, but thank you guys so much. We wanted to just hold with that presentation there on the COVID area risk score system and the methodology that went into coming up with it. Jay, did you have something?
No, I mean, it's the one thing that I guess people weren't saying in the interview, but Krystal kind of touched on it, is remember we the three of us, we kind of said so jokingly, kind of tongue-in-cheek a couple weeks ago when we had Annette Uggan and Dr. Ann Pobutsky from Public Health on, and we just kind of said at the tail end of that, it's like, okay, well, they've tried to scare people into, well, not scare, but, they've tried very aggressive ways of trying to get people to do what's right. They've implemented financial fines and restrictions and penalties. That didn't really hold.
No, they didn't implement fines.
No, but they talked about it. But now the sentiment, which is the most important part, is now maybe they're saying, let's have greed cancel greed. And if everybody's just doing what's best for themselves, we said, well, maybe if we incentivize this a little bit, maybe that'll get people to do things. And you see that on Facebook.
Come on, guys, there's a reward.
Yeah, some people are saying,
yeah,
hey,
guys, come on.
I saw something on Facebook and somebody's like, oh man, my birthday's coming up. I got to do what's right because I want to have my own party.
Yeah.
So now they're trying to do the reverse psychology end of it. So
is that what it is, Jay?
We'll see how that.
Thank you for lifting. He just moved the veil right there. It's reverse psychology, according to Jay.
I mean, no, and you even had your catchphrase, the stay home thing, and I mean that resonated, with a certain amount for like a little bit.
Apparently, that wasn't simple enough.
Yeah,
I thought it was really simple. Stay the hell home.
But okay. We'll see how this sticks.
Yeah, we're gonna go to a DOC talking about keeping a cluster in a cluster in a cluster. We'll go to Department of Corrections with Director Joe Carbolito next. To our viewers on KUAM TV, there's a whole bunch of great programming on the way. So either keep it there, or jump over on our KUAM News Facebook live feed, or you can also do it the traditional way on the radio, The Breeze, KUAM FM in Agatna, Guam, 93.9 FM. My name's Chris.
I'm Sabrina.
Esta. Adios. All right, we take a short break, and we're back with DOC Director Joe Carbolito.